Right.
Hello, I am AJ Camacho with WRGW's PINDROP. I am speaking right now with Ambassador Kathleen Doherty, who was the ambassador for the United States to Cyprus between 2015 and 2019. Ambassador Doherty, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
I want to lay a solid foundation at the beginning here. When looking towards the prospect of reunification on the island of Cyprus, what is the bottom line for Turkey and Northern Cyprus, and what is the bottom line for the Republic of Cyprus?
Well, there are a lot of factors obviously at play, but I think what really comes down to for the Republic of Cyprus is what they call the security guarantees, whether Turkey, Greece, and the United Kingdom would still have some kind of role in a unified Cyprus, and whether there would be continued Turkish and Greek troops on the island for either a transition period of time or to be departing on a day of unification. Um, Most negotiations have failed over that question about what is, if there is a continuing role, is there a transition time, is there a sunset clause of when these things will transition? And that's never really been successfully negotiated.
And on that note, you mentioned something that I think gets overlooked here a lot. The island's not just divided between the Republic of Cyprus and Northern Cyprus, but there's also both the UN Green Line, of course, and the United Kingdom, who still maintains bases there. Um, are those sort of perceived to be a done deal, or is there still a great deal of tension about the presence of British territory on the island?
Well, the legacy of when Cyprus got its independence from the United Kingdom in 1960, it's actually sovereign British territory that they, as part of the agreement. So I think it's about equivalent of about 100 square kilometers that is sovereign UK territory. And obviously, in the context of unification, the question of whether the territory would stay in its entirety, or would it be changed? Some of the parameters might change, but it was part of the conditions of independence. So it's not really part of the negotiations, but it might. United Kingdom was trying to be creative and trying to figure out ways that would help
Mhm.
facilitate unification when they're in the last round of negotiations.
And I understand as well that that was a big part of the reason why the United Kingdom chose to grant Cyprus independence with conditions like that it could not reunify with Greece, which is, as I understand it, was for a long time the wish of the majority of Cypriots. Where does that stand today? Is there still sort of this desire to reunify with Greece, or is it also something that's sort of taken a back burner and might come up again at some point?
With a very, very few nationalists probably believe in a theoretical unification with Greece, but I think the Republic of Cyprus very much enjoys its own sovereignty, being an EU member state,
Mhm.
having a seat in the United Nations. That being part of Greece doesn't really benefit the Republic of Cyprus, nor would it obviously be good for the entire the country cannot be unified under those conditions. So probably there are a few hardliners who talk about it, but it's much more of a cultural affiliation more than anything else.
Right. And you mentioned there that Cyprus is an EU member for the past since the early 2000s, I believe, mid
Right.
2000s. Um, what strikes me as somewhat confusing, turning to Turkey here for a second, they really want to be an EU member, it seems, or they've at least pronounced that rhetoric. Erdogan has said he expects it to take place by next year. I would dare say that's not quite going to happen. But my point is, uh, if they want to become an EU member, they're going to need to get approval from all current EU members, which includes the Republic of Cyprus. Why is it that Turkey continues to take a pretty hardline stance toward a two-state solution if it does know that Cyprus's approval would be needed for membership in the EU?
Yeah, I mean, I think Turkey's EU aspirations have they've been talked about for many, many years. I think it's hard to imagine that it actually could occur in any foreseeable future. So it's more of a hypothetical link rather than a
Mhm.
real link between it. You know, the Republic of Cyprus and Turkey don't have official relations, and it is problematic in that aspect that they don't recognize each other. And then the North obviously is not recognized by anyone but Turkey, which EU membership is a really complicated, was a very complicating matter for the Republic of Cyprus and unification talks in general. Um, and the EU tries to play a constructive role, but it's very difficult the EU itself to play a role in the negotiations when you have one member state and other member states not, and including now the United Kingdom is not a member state of the EU, so it makes it even more complicated. The three guarantors of Cyprus are the United Kingdom, Turkey, and Greece, with two of them not EU member states, and then the Republic of Cyprus being an EU member state. It makes it a very messy negotiations.
Mm-hmm. And of course, continuing on this sort of subject of Turkey, most people would say that over the past decade or so, past several years, Turkey has been drifting away from a lot of its NATO allies. It seems to be increasingly sort of the black sheep of the NATO alliance. I would argue that would be a general consensus, though the extent, of course, could be debated. Do you think that the role of U.S. relations with other regional partners like Turkey and like Greece are affected by the ongoing division of the island?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're probably actually, there's a lot of complications. The ongoing division of the island obviously affects NATO and EU collaboration, with the Republic of Cyprus being a member of EU, but not a member of NATO, and Turkey and Greece being a member of NATO. What's actually probably more of a problem is when tensions between Greece and Turkey rise, then it has an impact on the island and the stability of the island, and vice versa. If the island becomes more unstable, then there's tensions between Greece and Turkey, and they rise. And there's been times during the past 2 decades where, not that Greece and Turkey have actually come up to open conflict, but there's been enough tensions that there's been great concern that Turkey and Greece would have an open conflict. And that obviously has a spillover effect in the entire Eastern Mediterranean.
And how do you think those concerns are like today of the spiraling to an open conflict?
Yeah, there's been a lot of rhetoric. It actually it's also started during the attempted coup in Turkey when some Turkish soldiers fled to Greece and Greece didn't return them. There's been a lot of contested disputes over water and where's the water rights, who owns the islands. There's been some clashes between vessels, literally vessels, hitting each other unintentionally or not intentionally. And those are all potential things that could escalate. Thankfully, I think the leadership in Athens and in the leadership in Ankara, none of them want to have an open conflict between two NATO members. And it's more, it rises, it bubbles up to the surface, but never bubbles to the point that it explodes.
Sure. And as you mentioned, I imagine the United States would go to any lengths to ensure that there is not a conflict between two NATO members that actually escalates to war. Speaking of the United States, looking at the Biden administration, what do you see as the Biden administration's priorities with regards to Cyprus? As you've no doubt know, it's generally a relatively overlooked part of U.S. European policy, but also, as you note, it does play an important role. It's not completely insignificant. What do you see their priorities as being? And to the extent that you feel comfortable sharing, what do you think those priorities should be in the coming years of the Biden administration, whether that's 2 years or 6 years that it has left?
Over the last few years, including during the Trump administration, the U.S. has looked at Cyprus in two different aspects. One is priority is still to have unification of the island. That is still a top priority of the United States, is to facilitate negotiations and help support negotiations if they were to ever take place again to reunify the island. Secondly, is actually to look at the Republic of Cyprus as a strategic security partner. Given its geographic location being 100 miles or so from Lebanon, Israel, Syria, and the potential of, we say, a hot zone in the Eastern Mediterranean, we're doing a lot more training of Cypriot military officials in search and rescue, and other types of preparedness aspects of it. Given the Republic of Cyprus, that's fairly new to us. We didn't really engage in such a bilateral relationship with the Republic of Cyprus until about a few years ago. And it's a recognition that its geographic location is really important. It also has a very large influence. Russia has had traditionally a very large influence in Cyprus. China has a growing interest in Cyprus. Iran has interest in Cyprus. And so the U.S. is looking at the Republic of Cyprus as a more important strategic platform and partnership.
Mm. I should stress that when I spoke with Michael Rubin earlier, that he particularly lauded the Biden administration steps, even in just the past couple of months, in terms of further lifting like the arms embargo for the Republic of Cyprus. He personally viewed those as very productive steps.
Mm-hmm.
As always, there's room for debate with these things, but
Yeah,
I
there
thought that was
was.
worth
We
highlighting.
actually started, that was when I was ambassador, that was a proposal that we submitted to the Trump administration
Mhm.
and prior to that, even to the Obama administration, that it was time to change our perspective on Cyprus, to look at it more holistically rather than just the issue of the division of the island. And
Mhm.
it made suggestions like lifting the arms embargo and deepening the security relationship. So it's
Mhm.
actually been very much it's a work in progress, but it's certainly changed over the last few years.
I want to turn now just for one brief moment on something you had alluded to in your last answer, which is it's not just the issue primarily is perceived as concerning Cyprus, Turkey, and Greece, but of course Cyprus has other neighbors. As you mentioned, it's not far away from Israel. It's in fact trying to work with Israel towards cooperation on natural gas extraction, as
Mm-hmm.
I understand. Um, Egypt is not far away, Lebanon. How does the division of Cyprus impact the broader regional and international political situation, excluding Turkey and Greece?
Well, you talked about the energy issue. It's been much more complicated. Where the territorial waters end, and the Republic of Cyprus has negotiated delineation agreements with Egypt, with Israel, which Turkey in the northern part of Cyprus does not recognize as delineation agreements. So it makes gas and oil exploration much more complicated. That alone is a problem. And then there's been occasions when Turkey has challenged some drilling. We challenged an Italian vessel that was doing some exploratory drilling. Turkey brought in some military vessels to block that drilling. This was several years ago. So all those things could create factors that could create some real instability. I mean, they lead to all these things in its isolation are not that concerning, but if they tensions between Greece and Turkey rise, you've got Turkey maybe blocking gas exploration ships. You can see where it could really spiral into some kind of conflict, not necessarily a full-fledged war, but at least a conflict in rhetoric, if not a conflict greater than that.
Sure, taken alone, but how when they add up, what's the
Exactly.
potential? Um, Briefly turning towards the economy as well, Cyprus. We
Mm-hmm.
talked a lot about the division, but the 2008 financial crisis also hit Cyprus particularly hard, as it hit many countries hard. But Cyprus's GDP per capita still hasn't recovered. It's still, I think, $4,000 lower than it was in 2008. What do you think it is about Cyprus that has made the impact continue to reverberate? And what is your understanding of attempted reforms that might be able to help the Cyprus economy going forward?
Well, Russia and Russian money has had a disproportionate influence in Cyprus. Cyprus has been perceived as a money laundering center for Russia, dirty money, and well, Cyprus has cleaned up a lot of its bad practices. Before the Russian invasions of Ukraine, it still had a lot of Russian money. Some of it good Russian money, and some of it bad
Mhm.
Russian money. But Russian money, it was very heavily dependent on that. And also very heavily dependent on tourism, and particularly with Russian tourism. The British, about 1 million British tourists would come to Cyprus a year, and about 800,000 Russian tourists would come. And so now with Russian tourists not traveling, and then there's been sanctions against some very prominent Russians that had invested in Cyprus, it really has a spillover effect. Cyprus, the Republic of Cyprus hasn't really diversified its economy. It's heavily dependent on financial services, banking, and tourism. And with tourism being affected by the conflict and Russian money being tied up in Russia, it has had an impact on Cyprus.
Mm. Um, Ambassador Doherty, thank you so much for your time. But before I let you go,
Yeah.
The holidays are upon us, and we just thought it'd be fun and a tradition we'd like to start at PINDROP of when applicable, seeing if there are any particular holiday traditions about the country we're covering. Are you aware of any particular nuances to how Cyprus might celebrate the holidays?
Well, like all good countries, it often centers around food and family, and most people in Cyprus are Greek Orthodox, but they do celebrate Christmas on December 25th, usually then rather than traditional Orthodox date in January. But what it ends up being really is like 2 weeks of festivities. They'll celebrate on December 25th. They'll celebrate New Year's Day is actually when they traditionally exchange gifts is on New Year's Day, not on Christmas Day, and then they'll celebrate it on traditional Orthodox date. So I think it's great. You get to have 2 weeks of celebrations of food and family, and I do miss that. But it's a like everywhere, it's a great community gathering, and a lot of traditional food from people that people have been making for 100 years get passed on from family to family how to make these great. It's mostly sweets, as well as we have our cookies. They have their sweets as well.
Yeah, I think we need to bring that tradition to the US, having two whole
For two
weeks
weeks.
up until, yeah. No, that sounds brilliant. I'm a huge Christmas fan, and I would
Yeah,
certainly enjoy that.
yeah.
All right.
Nice.
Ambassador Kathleen Doherty was the US ambassador to Cyprus for 4 years between 2015 and 2019. Ambassador Doherty, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, and it was a great pleasure talking with you.